Okay, great. So I want to finish off part of the Marmakomas that we're on now. Hopefully we'll finish up tonight by discussing one other topic. So we've been discussing the issue of Ede Masira, Ede Chasima, Ede Kiyum, Ede Birur, very, the most important topics, frankly, of Edus and Ishus, etc. And tonight I want to speak a little bit about the concept of a ksav yad. A ksav yad, so let me explain. A typical shtar, typical contract, is one which is drawn up by a third party. Typically, therefore, it's either signed, by Ede Chasima, or, it tells a certain story, and then it's handed over, in the presence of the Edim. And that's what we've been discussing: Ede Chasima Karsi, Ede Masira Karsi, and how that works, etc. However, the Mishnah, if we could just turn our attention for a moment to the Mishnah on page Vav Amud Aleph. I'm just trying to see if it's in the Marmakomos or not. Hold on one second. It's in the previous Marmakomos for sure.
Vav Amud what? What is it, Rabbi?
It actually is in the Marmakomos on page 5.
No, I have the Gemara, so where is it?
Oh, Pei Vav, the Mishnah on Pei Vav Amud Aleph.
Pei Vav.
Pei Vav 86a.
Yeah, 1 minute.
Or it's also quoted on Gimel Amud Beis 3.
Let me look at Pei Vav. I'm sorry. Give me Pei Vav. Pei Vav and Pei Bet.
Pei Vav Amud Aleph 86a.
Okay.
So everybody have that? Everybody who's either, you could look at it in the Gemara, it's the Mishnah on Pei Vav Amud Aleph, or if you want to look in the sheets, here on my copy, it's on page 5. It might be on 4. That's also.
Are you talking about the Shlosha? What is it?
Shlosha Gittin Psulim.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Talmud Babli Masachet Gittin Pei Vav Amud Aleph. So the Mishnah says Shlosha Gittin Psulim. We've seen this Mishnah before. There are 3 Gittin, 3 iterations of a get, which are psulin, which are disqualified. But here we mean only midrabanan, only rabbinically disqualified. Meaning minat Torah, these 3 are effective, but midrabanan, we're not happy with the standards, and therefore we prefer not to use them. How do I know that that's the case? Because the next line in the Mishnah, which says, "V'imnises havlad kosher." If if one of these 3 gittin is used, and on the basis of that, a woman remarries. In other words, let's say Rivka is married to Reuven, and sadly they divorce. And they divorce with one of the 3 gittin that we're about to describe, types of gittin. And now Rivka, the former bright wife of Reuven, on the basis of the divorce, wants to remarry. She wants to marry Shimon.
But we have more already. There is already a child there.
What?
There is a child.
Right. So what we're no. So the explanation of Vimni says, if she goes ahead and marries on the basis of this get, which is not to the liking of the Chachamim, because we'll see in a moment what they are, because it's lacking some, preferred standard, and then she becomes pregnant, and she has a child. So that child, Vimni says, if she remarries, if she marries someone else on the basis of this get, and she then, with her new husband, they produce a child, Havlad kosher. The child is kosher. What do you mean?
Yes, there's no mamzerus there.
There's no mamzerus. So what does that signify? That means that even though the Chachamim would have preferred that she use a get with a different standard, with a higher standard, nonetheless, b'diavad, if this is what she did, she has passed the threshold of a shtar or a get minat Torah.
She's believed on her own.
Before, there's no mamzeris. Why?
On our own nemanis, right? Because we know that she would not want to get in a situation where it would turn out not to be.
No, this has nothing to do with nemanis. She's able to. Let's assume she has the get of the that the Chachamim would prefer was a higher caliber. So even that this has nothing to do with. There are other Gemaras that have to do with believing her.
No, because what if she claims the husband died, for example? Then we have this whole issue as to whether.
Yeah, but that's not here. That's when she makes that claim. Isha daiko mitzvah. If a woman claims that her husband is dead, so that's the Gemara's in the beginning of 10th parak of Yevamos.
It shows up. It's a very
yeah. That's called Bahorog Baraglov. I mean, he shows up. That's not good. But the reliance upon her testimony, her personal assurance that her husband, she knows her husband is dead without any further evidence, that is very that's a very fascinating topic, because really she's only one person, and she's also puzzle because she's a woman, she's one person.
Karov, everything.
And she's an Ogea B'davar and a Karov and everything wrapped into one. So that's why the Gemara says in the beginning of Isha Rabbah, the 10th parak of Yevamos, that we believe her because Isha Daika Uminsava. She wouldn't risk it because it'll blow up in her face if she's not super careful. When she makes such a claim
tomorrow, yeah,
exactly, or if not tomorrow, next week or next month or in 10 years. But either way, she will pay a very heavy price, for apparently deceiving. She'll deceive, but in the end of the day, she'll be the one, who pays the consequences. But that's not what we're talking about here at all. What we're talking about is something else. We're talking about we have the document which proves that we have the divorce document in front of us. But we can see that it is a second rate in terms of standards, as we'll see in a moment, document. And then the question is, since Minat Torah it works and Midrabanan it doesn't, what would be the
second rate because of Kiyum or Birur?
So no, neither in a way, because of the standards of the get.
It doesn't have native, right? It only has.
So there are three cases. So one is Kosa Biksav Yado, the Ein Alavedim. These are the three cases. So Kosa, that's what I want to zero in on today. Kosa Biksav Yado means that the husband wrote it out in his own hand. And there are no Eidim whatsoever. The second one is Yesh Alavedim.
What is the problem, that he wrote by himself or because there are no Eidim?
So Midoraisa, what we're saying is that all these three Gittin Minat Torah are good enough, but we prefer more. We prefer to have Eidim, but if he writes it Biksav Yado, that's considered good enough Minat Torah. That's a Chiddush. That Ksav Yad, his own handwriting, even without any kind of evidence, is considered a proper get. That's what I want to talk about tonight. The other example, the other issue is Yesh Alavedim, but Ein Bozman. Let's say the get has witnesses, but it doesn't say, the timing is missing from the text of the get. The Gemara on the Daf Yud Zayin in Gittin, discusses that the get should have Zman, Midrabanan, not Midoraisa, but Midrabanan we require to have Zman. Because without Zman, there are all sorts of consequences of a get, financial consequences, number one.
There's also Mamzerus consequences.
Mishum Peri, and the other one exactly is Mishum Mamzerus. So the Gemara says, Shema Yichapel Basachoso. What that means is that, even though she is his ex-wife, he doesn't want any harm to come to her. So he, if there's no Zman and she, was unfaithful while she was still married to him, since there's no Zman, so he might cover up her, improper behavior to save her from dire consequences. So that's a machlokas in the Gemara, Mishum Peri or Mishum.
Rabbi, could you just articulate a little bit what the word Zman means?
Zman means the timing. I mean, there's no date.
But what does that mean?
It means that the get, like, and most contracts, but especially a divorce contract, should spell out when exactly this divorce took place. This divorce took place on Tuesday, the 16th of Shvat. and the year of, etc. Let's say
So
the
it's a date,
divorce,
not
the date.
necessarily a period of duration.
No duration. But if we don't know exactly when the get took place, so then we're flying blind in terms of some of the economic consequences. That's what we say mishum peri. Mishum peri literally means fruit, meaning if she is supposed to collect, in her ksuva, she's supposed to collect, certain financial, benefits from his estate. So if there's no date, then there can be all sorts of chicanery, and
Yes, understood. Thank you.
it's like you're inviting mischief, you know what I mean? And the other one is Shemei Chapa Basachoso, which is what I was saying before, which is that, if it turns out that she behaved, in a manner which is just, unacceptable in every way, if there's no date in the get, then he can cover up for her, misconduct. And, it's kind of a little bit admirable when he wants to protect her, but, we're interested in justice. So without his man, that's not. So get number one that is, problematic, midrabanan, is if there are no witnesses whatsoever. There's only the handwritten, information given by the Baal. And get number two is yesh shalavedim bein bozman, and the third one is yesh bozman the ein bo ela eid echad. It's there is a date in the get, so you don't have the problem not of Peros and not of Shemei Chapa, and there is one witness, but there aren't two witnesses. So it's somewhere in between, the other cases. So these are three gittin.
Who wrote the third get?
What do you mean?
Is it the Baal or is it?
Let's say it's so fair. It could be that it's a discussion in the Gemara. It's a machlokus in the Gemara. Are we talking about ksav yad, sofer? That's a simple pshat. You have a sofer. He writes so you don't have because otherwise it's just like ksav yad, basically. I mean, the fact that there's an eid echad shouldn't make things worse. It should make them better, or it shouldn't have any material impact whatsoever. Because
when we say no aid, we mean both aid chasima and aid nesira.
Yeah, that's exactly what we mean. So we mean
where do we have even a havamina that's something that has no witnesses on?
Not only a havamina midoraisa, it works.
No, I'm saying so. Where do we get that fundamental in the first place?
Right, exactly. So that's what I want.
I mean, and all kinds of other.
Right. So the answer is, it's a little. So the answer is, and this is what I want to pursue a little bit more tonight, is that it's a little bit like the Gemara in Kiddushin that we've been discussing for the last few weeks. When the Gemara had a havamina, the Gemara originally thought that you would apply hodas baldin k'me'edim dami, meaning if the parties themselves admit that it took place, hodas baldin, if they admit it, k'mea edim dami, it's like 100 witnesses. Right? Because you have it in his own words. I mean, so this is kind of a written hodas baldin because it's written in the handwriting of the Baal himself.
Assuming that the wife, the ex-wife rather, admitted that it's accurate. What if she's contested?
Yeah, no, we're talking about she is the one who comes to court with this ksav yad because she wants to move on with her life. And the question is, can we rely on it or not? So you're right. If she contested it, that would be a different story. The question is, can we rely on it? And what we're saying is we prefer a more, upgraded version of the get.
If somebody wrote in his own hand, and yet there was room for signature on the get for Adam, would that be the same situation?
Yeah.
Because one could say that he got angry, let's say one day, and he said, "Oh, I'm gonna write a get," but then he never did it. He never called in the Adam because he also knows that Adam is better on the get than
right. But remember that the get never works until it's yotze mitachas yad ha'isha, meaning if he has it at
somehow
home.
She got it. Somehow she has it.
The same thing is true about Eidei Chasima also. Meaning, let's say he wrote out a get, everything, with, kedasu kedin, he dotted every I and crossed every T, and but it's in his house, it's not Yotze Mitachas Yada. It doesn't come from her, so that's no good. right? And in a way, that's these are really good questions, because that's part of the principle of Reish Lakish that says about any contract that Edim hachasumim al ashtar, witnesses who are signed on a contract, nasa commission echroidusim bebezin. It's as if they were like real Edim in a court, the real witnesses in a court, as if they were interrogated and investigated.
The highest means of confirmation of the truth.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you have, what is that? The answer is because if the witnesses, are properly entered and so on and so forth, and then the shtar is yotze mitachas yad ha'isha in the case of a get, so the presumption is that everything was done properly. That presumption is part of the Eidos Shebishtar, as we've been discussing.
Presumption is a function of chazaka, or what is it?
So that it's some sort of combination of what I call a blank check of Eidos, and based on the likely
rove, chazaka. Which one is it?
It's a kind of a rove. It's not really chazaka; it's more a rove. The rove being, or the umdana, which is a rove. That sometimes the halacha uses the expression chazaka, but it really means a rove. Meaning when we mean chazaka, which as chazaka we mean like a
that's what usually happens.
A presumed state,
yeah.
Right? A rove. When we use chazaka like this usually happens, that's really a rove. But it's what we call a ruba delesa kaman. Where it's not like you have a ruba delesa kaman where you have like 10 pieces of meat, and 8 of them we know are kosher, and 2 are not. But they're all sitting in the room. A ruba delesa kaman is, in the city, there's a majority of kosher meat. I'm not saying there is, but let's assume, and you have 1 piece of meat. So that's called ruba delesa kaman. So a lot of chazakos are what we call ruba delesa kaman, meaning they are. So these are like ruba delesa kaman. Meaning, what are the odds? But what we're really saying is, what are the odds that this contract, which is filled in properly, etc., ended up in the hands of the party, whose name, is explicated, if it wasn't properly delivered? You'd have to assume that it fell out of somebody's pocket, and that it dafka ended up in the hands of that other person. What are the odds of that? Especially since the Gemara says that you should, if you find a shtar in the street, you always chayshinan l'nefila. You should never give it to the party of, like, let's say you find a get in the street, with a woman's name in it. You're not supposed to pick it up and give it to her. That would defeat the whole purpose, So given that that's the case, chayshinan l'nefila, we say, if it's in the street, then there's a reisa, something is up. So when you put all those behaviors together, so if she does end up with the get that is signed by witnesses, let's say, and she is the one who is spoken of in the get, and she's the one who has the get, and she's the one who claims, yes, it was given to me either in front of Eidei Mesira or by the Baal, and it has Eidei Chasima. So then the presumption is hakol b'hechshanasa, and that is some sort of a combination of umdana, which means ruba delesa kaman, meaning a probability, and what we call edus shebishtar reish lakish, what I'd call a blank check almost of edus that says it all works in this way.
It's really a presumption, is what Reish Lakish is saying.
Yeah.
Once you have a star, the presumption is it's accurate.
Yeah, so that's very, very important. So basically, what we have so far is that there are 3 gittin, or 3 divorce contracts, which are subpar on a drabanan level, right? Either there are no witnesses whatsoever, it's only the ksav yad, or ein bozman, it doesn't have a date, and therefore, it's open to mischief making, if you will, or it has only 1 witness but not 2 witnesses. In all these cases, we say the get is minat Torah is acceptable.
Isn't the third
midrabanan
case,
it's not.
Isn't the third case really the outlier? I mean, the first 2 we can understand that there's
Yeah.
exceptions to the two Adam. The third one defies the whole basic fundamentals of what you
No,
require.
so what the Gemara
First
says
one has
is,
a caveat, which is equivalent to Ados Baldin Kamei Adam. Okay, fine, And not
It's a
having
good
the date,
question.
okay, could lead to mischief, but doesn't mean that the get wasn't given. Okay, the third one defies logic. I mean,
right, so the day of the
Adam.
right. So the Gemara has a suggestion that it's Ksav Yad Sofer v'Eid Echad. But the way they understand it is that the Ksav Yad Sofer is like an Eid Echad in its own right. Meaning the scribe, is also implicitly, he's there and he's writing down the instructions of the Baal. So even the reason it's subpar is because we don't like that combination. But
the sofer is always writing the shtar. I mean, he's always there. We don't
Who?
have it. The sofer, somebody's always.
Yes, but again, let's say this: if the sofer is like a relative, then this would not work even with
No,
Daraisa.
of course no. But if he's not a relative, he certainly could be an aid.
Right. So even though he's not signed as an aid, he's that's why it's Gittin Psulin, and yet it's Vlad Kosher, meaning the redeeming factor is that there are really two. Your question is a really good question. You're saying, where are the two witnesses? If you have Ksav Yad, that's Odos Baldin. If you have, two witnesses but no Zman, at least you have two witnesses. You're saying, where's the two witnesses in the Ksav Yad Sofer and the Eid Echad? The answer is the Ksav Yad Sofer is not the Edus that we would prefer. But if he's a Rachok and he's not a Pasul, you could still, by virtue of the fact that he's writing it
According
down,
to your logic,
it's an unorthodox.
He will kill the whole, because he's part of the Kad. He'll kill the whole get. According to this
No,
logic.
but forget about that. Killing the get because of Batla Mitzasa, Batla Kula, which is what you're saying, is that's already, what they say in Yiddish, a halbatzara. If you have two witnesses, and then in addition you have more, and one of them is a psul, that's a problem. But if you don't even have two witnesses to begin with, forget about it. There's nothing to talk about. So where are the two witnesses here? Ksav Yad Sofer is treated as an act of testimony, but you can totally understand why the Chachamim weren't happy with it, and especially since he might be a Karov, he might be a Pasul. So these are three gittin that are we'll call them substandard in terms of preference, but they're good enough min Torah that if she gets married based on it, there's no Vlad Mamzer. Okay, that is the
and there's no Shvua D'Rabbanan required of her, right?
What?
There's no Shvua D'Rabbanan required of her.
No, sure, because there's no in this whole case so far. There's no controversy about facts. What we're talking about is standards. Meaning the issue isn't, we're not sure.
Nobody's come up to contest it.
Right. No one's contesting, and there's no reason to contest it, but we're not happy with the standards. Now, is some of the reason that we don't like the standards because, it may make it more contestable, like things of the Zman, and so yes, but there's no, that isn't the issue in this case. The issue in this case is the standards of the thing. Anyway, this is the Mishnah. This is a critical Mishnah, so that's what these cases are. V'imnisa, and then the Mishnah repeats, V'imnisa, Harei elu gimel gittin psulim. These are three disqualified gittin in the sense that we prefer not to use them. They're substandard. V'imnisa, but if you do use them, havlad kosher. Then the Mishnah concludes, as we've seen before, Rabbi Lazar, Omer, Afal pi she'eino levedim l'shanasno, bifnei edim, kosher. This is where Rabbi Eliezer's Eidim Masira comes in. This is the Mishnah that tells us about it. Rabbi Eliezer says, I have a get which is good min Torah, even though there are no physical Eidim at all in the text. And that is when the Eidim are present when
that's all the time with Rabbi Eliezer.
What?
That's all the time. Yeah.
No, you're saying it's all the time, but that's because But where did it come from?
Okay.
This is where it came from. This is the original statement of Rabbi Eliezer.
Okay.
Right? So it's good that we know, but it's always good to know this is where it came from. The Govim and Chasam Mishubadim, Rabbi Eliezer says that you will be able to, not only that, but a shtar b'eidim masira, you'll be able to collect on the basis of that get or shtar, even though there are no witnesses in it, as long as the witnesses.
But not if it has no date.
No. We're not talking about those three anymore. Now we're talking about Edim Mesira Karsi. She'eno Edim Chos Malaget Elam Mipnei Tikkun Ha'olam. Because the only reason, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that you need this is the statement in the Mishnah here in Lamed Daled that we've been speaking about so much. Okay. So
what is the Tikkun Olam here? That
No,
what,
the Tikkun Olam is
that he will deny that he gave the get?
No. The Tikkun Olam is what happens if the this is spelled out in the Gemara on Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. What happens if the Eidei Mesira, go traveling and they're no longer accessible, or if they die? So if we have Eidim signed, we have their signature, even if they die, even if they travel, we have it in the text of the get. We have the evidence.
So
But if we rely on the
Eidim.
Eidim Mesira, then they're not alive anymore, or they're not accessible, then we're in trouble. So then Mishum Tikkun Olam means it's a constructive enactment, that even though you don't need Eidim to sign, if they sign, it'll be very helpful because then we can use them as Raya. Okay? So now the question is, everybody with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so now the question is this idea of Kasa B'Ksav Yado Ve'ein Alav Eidim, this idea of having a contract, which is just the admission or the text, in other words, the Ksav Yad of the Mischayev, that needs to be clarified more, because we understand, Ein Bozman, but Yesh Bo Eidim, a combination of Eidim of Ksav Sofer and Ein Echad, but at least there are two witnesses, like we said before. This Ksav Yad has no witnesses. Where does that come from? What is that? And what is the status of that in other areas of halacha? I want to investigate that too. So Rashi already registers trouble with it. Rashi's saying, how does Kasa B'Ksav Yado fit in without the Eidos? I already, told you partly the answer, but I want to show you. This is what I want to examine. Of the three Gittin, which are psulim, the most surprising, is Kasa B'Ksav Yado, because there are no Eidim whatsoever. There are no witnesses.
But there are Eidei Mesira, and Eidei Mesira is a powerful thing.
No Eidei Mesira. Kasa B'Ksav Yado, the Ein Olav Eidim, is Kishmo Kenu. There are no witnesses, not signed and not present. So it's just the written text of let's say in the case of a get, it's the husband writing out the details of the get without any kind of corroboration whatsoever. Why does that work? So look at Rashi.
Well, then we said, that's a standard concept. Why is the Gemara so surprised?
So no, the Gemara isn't, but Rashi's dealing with this. Why are they surprised? Because Hodos Baldin, as we know, is not something that should work necessarily in Ishos, right? It works in Dinim Aminis.
I mean, it's possible it doesn't work in Ishos, but we could see that, we could understand the Havamina that we could say that it could work in Ishos. And by the way, this isn't
just a Havamina. We're saying that this really works in Torah.
No, I mean, we have no reason to put that demarcation there. I mean, you could say Ishus.
Well, I mean, we just spent like 3 different shiurim, speaking about how Eidei Kiyum, which is about the Maisa Gerushin, admittedly, not the, but it differs from Eidei Birur, and we do, and part of the reason is because the Gemara says in Kedushin, Samachem and base, that the principle of Hodos Baldin doesn't really apply. So there, the Hodos Baldin is on the action. Here it is on the we'll call it the Chefsa Shel Shtar, or the Chefsa Shel Get.
But as you pointed out, there's no one contesting it here.
Right, but the whole point of Eidei Kiyum is that even absent any contest or any dispute, these are just standards that are required for Ishos because of Davar Sheberva. Remember, the whole point was that in the case in Kedushin,
that's why.
Right. They both agree that they got married, but we don't rely on it.
If it was a sofer, would be sufficient as one witness.
No, the Ksav Sofer and a plus an Eid Echad would be sufficient as on a Daraisa level as 2 Eidim. That's correct.
As 2 Eidim. Yes.
Yeah. Because you have assuming that the sofer is a kosher aid, meaning that he's not a relative, etc.
Right, which was the other point. Yeah, but
But
if
here,
it
but
is-
that's what we're talking about here. Here we're talking about kasa biksav yado, not a sofer. We're talking
right.
about
But I'm saying if it's a sofer, then
Right,
there's at least
right.
one witness.
correct. And then you have another one who signs, so then you have two combined.
Yeah.
Here, that's what I'm saying. The most of these three cases, the most problematic is kasav biksav yado. The husband writes it in his own hand.
In its own handwriting.
The ein elevadim, and we're saying that minatora midaraisa, that's a proper get. That's a little surprising, or a lot surprising. So you can see what's going on here. Look at Rashi.
So the sofer and being the aid is not a conflict of interest. That's clear.
No, because it's not. It's only be a conflict of interest if he has, where they say skin in the game, and if there's some,
If he's getting paid, he has skin in the game, no?
okay, who's paying him? I guess it.
But I always thought the witnesses are verifying what's written. But if you're the one writing, you're gonna.
Maybe you're writing as a professional, so you can write as a professional.
Yeah. But if you're writing as a professional, like Andy said, you're getting paid. You're more motivated.
Or maybe you
to
are.
say
Maybe
everything's
you're not.
okay.
Well, it's not clear.
Whether you're getting paid or not, you take the money out of it. When you're writing it, you're a nogea b'davar that you want it to work, right? You don't want to waste your time.
No, not necessarily. As long as it doesn't affect you in any personal way, just because
It affects your time. It affects your time. You don't want to write a document that's useless.
That's not likely, sufficiently to qualify for nogea b'davar. Nogea b'davar typically means there's a monetary, interest in the case, like you're a party of concern in the case objectively before your involvement, as an aid. And here you're not. You just, a sofer. Even in modern gittin, sometimes the sofer will also serve as an aid, because he's not related in any way, and therefore he's not pasul, and he has no financial interest in whether the get is going to work or not work. So why not? But again, we try to keep these things, separate, just because it's less complicated that way.
I mean, at a chasna, for example, the two Eidei Ksuba, I'm just thinking in today's time, can you be I guess you can do both. I think we talked about this.
Let's say a sofer draws up a ksuba.
The aid also, right?
Let's say a sofer draws up a ksuba. Right? He can be an aid on the ksuba. Why not?
Right. Okay.
That's not considered. No, these are good questions, but it's not. It wouldn't reach the threshold.
I just always assumed that the Adam were not the writers of it, just till tonight. So either way.
Yeah, no. Again, we prefer that they not be. That's why it's a gimel gittim psulim. But on a daraisa level, it's not. It's not an issue. Okay, so Rashi is troubled by this. Look at Rashi, bimnisas avlad kosher. Again, if you have a Gemara, it's Rashi dibur masel bimnises avlad kosher.
Yeah.
If you have the sheets, it's here on page probably 5, or I think it's 5. Bimnisas avlad kosher. Rashi says, "Hi Tana," the author of this view that Ksav is good enough. Love Rabbi Meir Svirle. He doesn't hold like Rabbi Meir. The Amar de Chasima Karsi, to Rabbi Meir Avlad Mamzer. According to Rabbi Meir, that you really need 2 witnesses to sign. Actually, that you need them to sign
to avoid
what?
To avoid mamzerus.
Yeah. So he's saying Kasab Ksav Yado should be like Amao, should be Havlad Mamzer.
Sure.
This is Rashi's way of saying I don't see why Kasab Ksav Yado is good enough. If you need Eidei Chasima, which are objective Eidim, how can you substitute that with what we're calling Hodos Baldin Kamedim Dami?
And he's not troubled with the single aid? He should be equally troubled, no?
By what?
By a single aid.
No, but no, because as we said, the single aid is combining with the sofer, with the ksav yad sofer. So really, there are two aidim.
So if there was a single aid without the Ksav Yad Sofer, then Rashi would have the same problem.
Say that again.
In other words, I mean,
Meaning, if you hold Eidei Chasima Karsi, you could say
that.
that the ksav yad of the sofer is a kind of chasima.
So since there's always a Ksav Yad of the Sofer,
But the ksav yad is written by the Baal. He's not an objective aid.
No, so basically, what you're saying right now, since every 99% of the shtarim are written by Sofrim, okay? So what you're basically saying is that every shtar only needs one aid.
I'm saying Minat Torah, that would be the case. We prefer, that's what
that is to me a bomb. Not the so I mean, all of a sudden everything we learned about you need two aidim. Now for all practical purposes.
No, it's not a bomb, because you do need two aidim. We're just saying that the person who writes it out, I mean, it would have to be, if it's with his ksav yad, then that's his edus. Instead of saying Bob Smith, we know he's Bob Smith because that's his handwriting. It's Bob Smith's handwriting. But again, we don't do this because that's what we say Gimel Gittin Psulim, right? But we're talking about Ein Avlad Mamzer, at least. We're saying B'diavad, Eidei Chasima could take the form of Ksav Yad Sofer, not because you don't need to aid him, but because he's considered the second aid.
It's like a B'diavad?
B'diavad, yeah. When we say Avlad Kosher, we mean B'diavad. But L'chatchila, we don't do it. Okay. But what Rashi's asking is, why is Ksav Yad work even B'diavad? There's no aid. Meaning the husband wrote it out. He's right? There are no witnesses. So he said that's the first line. If you hold like Rabbi Meir, says Rashi, that Eidei Chasima Karsi, then Ksav Yad should be Avlad Mamzer. Ulaman de Mukala beGemara, Rabbi Meir, there is a man Amar in the Gemara when you read the continuation of the Gemara in Pevav Amud Aleph and Pevav Amud Beis, that says, the author of the Mishnah is Rabbi Meir until the end. Because remember what happens, the last few lines of the Mishnah introduces Rabbi Eliezer, right? That's Rabbi Eliezer. So one view in the Gemara says, who's the Mandamar? Who's the author of the Mishnah before Rabbi Eliezer comes in? Must be Rabbi Meir. So then Rabbi Meir is agreeing that Kasa b'Ksav Yado is good enough. How could that be? Says Rashi, Ikelameimar d'Ksav Yado, this is what I said to you before. I was just jumping. You asked me, sorry. Ikelameimar d'Ksav Yado Kimea Edim Dami. Even though, he's not a witness, there's Hodah Spaldin. But we're saying that the Hodah Spaldin is good enough in Gittin. Wow. The Lav Kirab Elazar Svirale, the Amar Edim Masira Karsi, the Rabbi Elazar B'Seifa. It can't be Rabbi Eliezer because he's brought in the Mishnah later on. Ela Kivan Dik. Now here it's tricky with Rashi. Kivan Dik Ksav Yadohu, since it's his handwriting, meaning the Baal, the Kasav Nasan Karina Bey, meaning with the Torah uses the expression the Kasav law Sefer Krisus V'Nasan Biyada, right? Now the Kasav refers to who?
That's the Sofer usually, but the Baal. To the
Baal. So Rashi's saying something quite brilliant. Rashi's saying, listen, what do you want from...
Can't be better than that. Kasav and Nasan.
On the one hand, it seems the whole thing seems scandalous, which is what you're all saying, because there are no Eidim.
Is there a concept?
On the other hand, it's more than Eidus because it's his own Ksav.
Is there a concept here that we have in secular law of testimony against interest?
No, that's I think what Jacob was asking before. There's no that goes back to he was asking about Sofer. You're asking me about him. Well, it's not against his interest. It's like Chav Lachrini in a way, like in the Gemara in Kiddushin. That's why it's very mechudash. But we'll see in a moment. The Afagav the Lake Edim Mesira Kosher B'Daraisa Mi Rabbanim Paslinu Dilma Asi Lachshuri B'Ksav Sofer. Let's say they're worried let's say you have a sofer and he writes out the get, and not with an eid echad, just a ksav sofer. That would be just like having an eid echad and nothing else. That would be no good. So therefore, midrabanan, they don't want you to have the ksav yad of the baal. Therefore, lechatchila, you shouldn't use it. The imnisei savlad kosher, but dafke ksav yado, aval ksav sofer, ve'ein sham aid. If you had only the ksav sofer and not an additional aid, then havlad mamzer, because there's no get. Okay, so what comes out of this so far is that there is, according to the Mishnah in the end of the Masechta, something called Hasav Biksav Yado, the handwriting of the Mischayev, in this case the Baal, which even though it's not, typical Eidus, it sounds like Rashi is throwing out two different ideas. So the first point of Rashi, just to sum up, it's a very packed Rashi. The first point is Rashi saying is, I think this doesn't work. If you need Eidei Chasima Karsi, if you need real Eidim, this guy's not an aid about himself. That's one point. Then Rashi's stuck. So Rashi says, but the Gemara does think Rabbi Meir is the author of the Mishnah, so it's got to work somehow. So then he throws out two different ideas. One is Hodas Baldin Kameidim Dami, meaning since, Ein Lecha Hodah Gedola Mizu, it's in his handwriting. He's like, it's like, you've frozen him in time, You have him in his handwriting saying, I hereby divorce, my wife, da-da-da-da-da. So that's Hodas Baldin. The question, the Chiddush is, Hodas Baldin can work in a get, even though you would think that you need a kiyum for the, well, maybe it doesn't work for the Maisa Gerushin, but does it even work for the get? That's the question. And then Rashi has another idea that he throws out. It's hard to know whether idea number 2 and idea number 3 are the same, or there are two different ideas. And that
usually when Rashi brings
because it says v'kasav v'nasan, so v'kasav v'nasan is ein lecha, that the simple pshat of the words in the psukim is, like the paradigm of a get would be v'kasav. I'm sorry.
Usually when Rashi brings the second idea, he's not too happy with the first one.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is in this case, it's even more than that. We're not sure, when he says originally, dami, and then he says, Ella karina be, are these two different points? Or does he think that it's the same thing? Hard to know. Anyways, so let me ask, so we...
At the end of the day, the Gemara holds that all three of these are in one class, right?
They're in one class in the sense that they work in
the blood is not a mamzer.
Correct. Correct.
Now, I understand that if a child is born, the blood is not a mamzer.
Right.
But let's say they have this kind of a get, and 3 months later, before anything happens, Bezdin is aware of this kind of get. Can they say you can't have a get like this? You have to go correct it, or?
Yes, they absolutely can. Because the lechatchila, you shouldn't. That's what puzzle mean. They say we're not accepting this get. Now, if there's a child, they're not going to say we're not accepting this get, because they would be branding a child, which Minat Torah is not a mamzer. They'd be creating, that would be very cruel. They would never do that.
But Bezdin can insist before the child is born or something happens like that, that they have to
get a better get.
So she would be considered an Ashes Ish still at that point?
No.
Somebody wanted to marry her, let's say.
I'm saying if she got married and...
No, she didn't. But if somebody wanted to marry her, okay, at that point, is he allowed
She's
to
not an Ashes Ish because it's a get Minat Torah. But we don't want her to get married with this flimsier or substandard.
So the person who wants to marry her, he is forbidden to marry her.
Correct. If they're all aware of this in advance, then the courts would not allow it. If somebody messed up and they did it, and they're already married, and especially there's already a child, or simply they're already married, and therefore we're not going to say.
But the obligation of the foreign party, the new husband, okay, is that he should not get into he should not marry such a.
Bezdin should not allow the new husband should not marry a divorcee whose get is substandard.
This is a deficient get.
Right?
If new information comes to light, can the title of mamzer be reversed at a later date if if subsequently Adam come forward, or there's another document found that has Adam
sure.
on
Sure. I mean, but you're talking about there's no mamzer in these three cases because there's a get minatora. You're asking me a different question. You're saying, let's say the assumption was that a woman remarried or re-entered a relationship without getting a proper divorce, in which case the child, if she's still an HSE from another man, would be a mamzer. And you're saying, let's say that's what everybody thought, but it turned out that there really was a divorce. Would we still consider, because we thought at a certain point that the child was a mamzer?
Yeah.
The answer
Exactly
is
my
no.
question.
We'd be very thrilled to find out, if it were true, that we were wrong and that the child's not a mamzer.
And שכן לבוא בקהל. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. We're always trying to avoid, the stigma of mamzerus, because, it's a very difficult, you can't always avoid it, but,
You cannot undo it sometimes, and then there is choice. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But if legitimately it turns out that we were mistaken, l'tova, meaning we thought that it was, a terrible dilemma, and it turns out that there was a solution, then of course we would.
It's also a case where the one suffering to some degree can be considered the innocent party.
Yeah, but I mean, the problem of mamzer, I don't want to get into this right now because it's a whole different topic. But a mamzer is always a victim, of other people's.
Not their fault. It's not their fault.
Right, but that doesn't.
We're
reality.
protecting the sum total of the Jewish DNA, so to speak.
Meaning, in some cases, there's nothing to do about it, but it's unfair. It's just part of the system.
Right.
And you sometimes even in halacha, which we consider to be, a perfect system in some respects, but that doesn't mean in all cases it comes out perfect. And Rambam says this in Moreh Nevuchim. He says, listen, as perfect as Torah Hashem Temima as it is, and there's no such thing as a legal system. A legal system has to operate according to objective laws. And there will be cases, in which there will be injustices or unhappy, consequences, which we would all have preferred to, avoid. But you just can't, wave your magic wand and wave it away, because that would make a joke, a chucho tlula of the law. So there's always in law, and certainly in halacha, a balance between, trying to be humane, and trying hard to be humane, and at the same time, the rigor and the integrity of the system. In the end of the day, if there's no rigor and integrity, then everybody loses. But that doesn't mean that there aren't cases in which there are victims, who have no culpability whatsoever, and our heart goes out to them. We always try in such cases to find, a solution, but we don't always find a solution. There are some cases where, sadly, after, looking, we can't. And then the integrity of the law, which protects the totality of Jewish law and the system, takes, precedence, even tragically, over the fate of certain individuals. I mean, anybody who tells you that, in all circumstances you can solve, situations which are unhappy or tragic, whether it's the same thing with an aguna case. There's a law of aguna. That's the real aguna is not the aguna that we speak of in our time, mostly. Meaning, real aguna means that a woman's status, is unclear. Like we were talking before, her husband goes away and he disappears. He falls into a mayim she'ein lehem sof or something like that. So again, we have rules like we were talking about before. About we do relax, the rules somewhat in order to find evidence, to establish that he died, so that a woman can move on with her life. That's the classic aguna. The classic aguna is a woman in chains. What does that mean? It means she's married to someone and she's stuck because we don't know what his status is. But so historically, the halacha always works very hard to resolve those cases. But anybody who tells you that every single case is resolvable, it's just nonsense. Of course not.
No. But in the last few years, what surfaced was the issue of course, Kiddushin.
No, so let me say two things. So number one is what often is called aguna today. They say, oh, the aguna problem. They don't mean husbands, who went off to war, or who disappeared, off the face of the earth. We now use that same term, in situations where husbands, let's say, are recalcitrant, and they don't, give a get. Or people are like using
that's proof. That's a
extort.
Yeah.
So that's something that we, in the sense that woman can be in limbo, she can't move ahead with her life until she gets a get, and he has the power. So that's what people have been calling, a guna. It's not the real case, but that, of course, is a very terrible problem. And there have been efforts to, to find some mechanisms, to alleviate that problem, including, in our part of the community, certainly, signing of prenuptial agreements that basically declare that if a marriage is broken down irreparably, like, counseling and things of that are not going to help anymore, to provide financial pressures or incentives for a husband, to quickly give a get, otherwise, to have the burden of mazonos, upon him in a very impactful way. So like every day he delays giving a get when the Bezdin decides, that this is the only solution, he'll have to pay, X amount of dollars. They have to construct this. Again, we're getting a little far afield, but they have to construct this in a careful way because they don't want it to be what's called an asmachta. Asmachta means like an exaggeration. So if you just like impose penalties and people accept them, but they don't really think it's ever going to happen to them, or it's exaggerated, then it's not really binding. So what they had to do is create something which was reasonable. So they do it mazonos, meaning how much room and board, but not in a minimalist way, but in a dignified way. Actually, Rabbi Mordechai Willig, who is a very close colleague of mine in the yeshiva, he really is the one who was the architect of the document that many of us, are familiar with and use, in our weddings, the prenuptial agreement, and it's written in a very careful way. He tweaked it. He went all over the world, basically, consulting with different rabbanim, getting their input, that you can make something that would be effective, but wouldn't be an asmachta. And that would be, people would be willing to, sign. And I think, it's a very important endeavor. And typically when I do weddings, for my students, they sign this, prenuptial agreement in advance, that spells out these conditions. That's to avoid the other kind of aguna, meaning the temptation, that the husband would have to extort, from his soon-to-be ex-wife to give her a get, but, to use that leverage, let's say, to impose conditions that are.
So how do the mechanics work? They sign this, and therefore, if they get divorced, he's forced to give her a get. I'm trying to understand the mechanics.
So mechanics are, if it's deemed, if the marriage breaks down,
there's financial penalties that will cause him to want to give.
Well, I'm trying to understand. Yeah.
No, this is what happens. What they sign is what's called they sign a arbitration agreement, number one, which says, we both agree that Rabbi X or Bezdin Y, will be the arbitrator in this dispute. That's number one. And if the arbitrator or the Bezdin arbitrator determines that the conditions of the document should apply, so then, as you just said, it's a Tosefes Mazonos agreement. What it says is, if the determination by the arbiter or the Bezdin arbiter is that this marriage is irrevocably broken down, meaning there's no reconciliation, possible. So then we want the husband to give a get as soon as possible, we can't force him halachically. It's called a get meusa, that it compromises the, the quality of the get. So what we do is we want to provide a financial incentive. I'm saying it that way because if it was a penalty, and it was not correspondent, it would be a problem of asmachta. As I said before, like he signs it, when they're in bliss, they're about to live together forever.
Is this
So,
mentioned in the Ksuba?
What?
It's mentioned in the Ksuba?
No. This is a separate document.
Well, it's a septa mizonos, you said.
I said what?
You said it was like a septa for the mizonos. It was an
It's a
additional-
tosefes mizonos. It's an addition to mizonos. Meaning, so what we usually have them put in is that if it's determined that this is the route that should be followed, then let's say the husband commits to pay $200, let's say, a day for a hotel, for food, for expenses, until he gives a get. So that can add up very quickly.
So it only works if the guy is money conscious. Meaning, at the end of the day, it's a financial penalty. So it's $200 times 7.
Or financial incentive. But of course, you can tailor the financial incentive
Based
to
on the guy's net
person.
worth.
Yeah, for sure. In other words, let's
If
say
the guy was a billionaire, you'd make the numbers different.
yes, correct.
Okay. And
Because
you have all
otherwise,
your
as you
students
say,
sign this?
what?
You encourage your Talmudim to sign this.
Yeah, my students, almost all of them.
Wow.
In weddings, over the
That's
years,
impressive.
we're talking about a lot of weddings. Almost no one. I've had 1 or 2 people, didn't want to sign it. They thought it was too jarring a note. There are some of my colleagues who refuse to do a wedding if this isn't signed. I've found over the years that that's not the way to go with this, but almost no one refuses to sign it because
It's a pretty aggressive
always,
stance to take for young kids. You know what I'm saying?
right. So what I tell them, which is the truth,
It's almost like having a prenup, before a wedding. For some people, have to
right.
do.
But what I try to explain to them is, this is something that should be done anyway. I mean, no one should be using a get to extort. Number one, and they understand that. They're good. They're amazing. Young men. So that's number one. And number two is what's more is like I tell my we got off topic here, but
Well, it's an interesting topic.
What?
It's an interesting topic. You never brought it up, and since you've been teaching for that, I never knew that you do this for your students. Maybe others knew.
So what I do is, for example, some people, like to publicize it at the wedding itself. I don't.
But what's the upside of doing that?
So the upside is because they want to encourage more people to do it, that they see it, being
Not
Sounds like a great thing to do at a wedding.
Not the classiest thing to do.
Yeah, I would agree.
Exactly. So I always tell the student, I tell my Talmidim or them that I find it to be it's very jarring to be planning your divorce,
Your divorce
at your chassan's tish of your wedding, so the way you should look at it is that, is you do this not for yourself. When you're getting married, you should feel, idealistically, that this is not relevant to you. But we also know that in the real world, there's going to be a percentage of people whose marriages, we're learning Masachet Gittin, right? So we know that some marriages don't work out, and that's the way it is. I mean, so what I tell people is you're not doing this for yourself. You're doing it so that more people will do it, and the percentage of people that need it will have it. It won't be a stigma.
In other words, by your doing it, you're going to help a problem marriage. Not that you're the problem.
It's not your problem necessarily.
You're helping others that have a problem.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean you want to do it at the chassan's tish. You know what I'm saying? So what I tell them is do it in advance. I always make sure they do it in advance. We usually send it into the Beis Din of America.
RCA, is it?
Fill it out properly. It's a document out there. What?
That's the RCA, is Beis Din of America? Is
RCA,
OU.
the OU,
Okay.
ORA, a bunch of organizations. I'd say Rabbi Willig really is the one who was the architect of the actual text of it.
Interesting.
And he did he really did a very good job. He just, it's very.
Have you ever had to use it have you had cases?
I have not, but there have been cases, and they've been.
But not under your Talmudim.
Not of my Talmudim that I'm aware of.
Okay, good.
But we know in the community, of course, that people have used it.
Issues, right? Of course.
But, as I say, my pitch, which I believe in, is to do it for Klal Yisrael and do it for the people who need it, so it won't be a stigma. So, the fact that it hasn't, mostly been relevant to them is actually good, but it doesn't make it less urgent, to do it. The ksuva, I'll just tell you one other thing since we're talking about it, but kind of running out of time. But, one of my students, again, many years ago, got very enthusiastic about the whole thing. We should be, publicizing this because it's so important for the people who need it. And he said to me, like, what's the difference between that and the ksuva? But
well, the ksuba is from the Torah, and this isn't. So the ksuba you're required to publicize, and this you're not.
I think there are two things.
Obviously,
one is what you just said, which is the ksuba is an ancient, whether it's Dorais or Drabanan. Either way, the ksuba is an ancient document, and this is a newfangled document that people are, some people are uncomfortable with, which is what you just said. And I think that is totally true. But there's another element too, and this is something we've talked about in the past. I think it's a really important idea, and that is that the ksuva, of course, applies in the event of divorce, or if the husband predeceases his wife. But in the end of the day, the purpose of the ksuva, in my opinion, is also to provide confidence, during the marriage itself. Meaning,
correct.
The wife always knows, that she, two things.
We'll
Number
get
one,
X, Y, and Z.
There's security. And number two is part of the purpose of the ksuva is that there shouldn't be strife and divorce. Shalote kala be'inav lahotzia. I mean, if he gets angry or something, we were talking earlier in the year about.
Yeah, we learned this together, right?
It's also the secular flip side of the idea that the Rambam says that instead of taking somebody from the shuk, you basically have a process of kedushin and nisuin that elevates the process, but also by creating a financial underpinning to the marriage, you also.
So this is my view of the ksuva, 100%. That's exactly what it is. So in my opinion, I was trying to explain, there's a minhag in Klal Yisrael, which we're all familiar with, but we know that the ksuva is usually read under the chuppah.
Yes.
Now, why is the ksuva read under the chuppah? So there's a tshuva of Rashi. Rashi says it's a way of breaking up the two phases of the marriage, is the erusin and the nisuin. Which is fine. You couldn't figure anything else out to break it up other than reading the ksuva.
Right.
In my opinion, because
of
what we're saying right now, what appears to be a disturbing, document, in event of divorce or predeceasing, upon deeper reflection, that's not what it is at all. I mean, it applies then, but it's really about providing confidence and security in the marriage itself. If both parties know that the marriage is something that you don't walk away from easily, because there are consequences, and then you have to try to,
work things out,
to work on a marriage, and each side has a certain confidence, because the ksuva makes walking away, a legal matter. So in the end of the day, the sense of confidence and security, lend greater, exactly what you said, dignity to the marriage. So I can't think of a better thing to actually read under the chuppah. So that's my take on it.
Well, you're talking about the ksuba. The ksuba. Right.
The prenup is the opposite. The prenup
is the opposite. It makes you think of unwinding it.
Yeah, because the prenup is only an event where the differences are irreconcilable, and they're definitely not going back.
Yeah, but who wants to talk about that at a wedding? I'm saying it's ridiculous. I'm saying it's
exactly. So I'm glad you're agreeing with my.
No, but you're saying you have many colleagues that want to pronounce it.
No.
Well, when did they read it? All these.
No, I didn't say that.
When did they read it? At the chuppah?
No, I didn't say that. I said I once had a student whose enthusiasm for the benefits of making this, kind of more accepted, he wanted, at his wedding, that it should be read, and I dissuaded him. I didn't say that my colleagues.
But where did this Talmud want it read? I'm curious.
He said.
Had you agreed? Where, under the chuppah?
Yeah.
He wanted right after the ksuba, or when? I'm just curious.
It doesn't. It was a long time ago. Yeah. He said, why don't I said to him,
merge it with the ksuba.
not merge it separately. But he meant well. He was trying to.
A lot of people mean well.
He
Some
was
people
trying
think
to
Joe Biden means
facilitate
well.
greater use of the document. I said to him, if you do that, number one, people are going to be upset. They'll say, for what you said before, they'll say, you're treating it like the ksuva and you're creating new minhagim. I said, you'll antagonize more people than you'll convince. And secondly, I think it's a jarring note. It's not the same as the ksuva. The ksuva is what I call a kiyum in the ishus. It's something that strengthens the marriage.
Correct.
The prenup doesn't strengthen the marriage. It just negates
It helps you on an
an
exit.
abuse of trying to extort when you
Right.
need anyway to have a grant. So it's subtly different, but very important different. And therefore, it's different enough. Anyways, let's get back to where we
Thanks for explaining.
So Kosa B'Ksav as we see of the three Gittin, Psulim, but Tavlad Kasher, is the one that's controversial, and Rashi is kind of, struggling with it. Is it Hodas Baldin Kamedim Dami? Is it Exeris HaKasuv, the Kasav Nasan? So it's very interesting to also trace the status of Ksav Yad, meaning this, handwritten, text, this handwritten contract, through other areas of halacha. So what I want to do, I don't have more than another 5 or so minutes, but what about Kiddushin? Does Ksav Yad work in Kiddushin? We only know for sure that it works.
You mean when you want to use shtar for Kedushin?
Yeah. If you want to be Mekadesh B'shtar, can you do that? Of course, there's the question of Eidei Chasim, Eidei Masir. We'll get back to that too. Let's say the husband writes out B'Ksav Yado a shtar in the same way that he writes out a get. Would that work in Gittin Binat Torah or not?
Do you have to aid them observing the shtar?
No. We're talking about no. I'm talking about the document. I'm not talking about handing over the.
No, but I mean, for example, with every kind of kedushin we do, the ring or whatever, kesef, whatever we do, we now have to aid them observing.
That's a good question.
No, that's it. That's the question of the Eidei Kiyum, which we've been discussing last few weeks.
Right. So I'm saying,
I'm talking about the Chefza shall get the shtar itself. What about the shtar itself?
So what would the psul be if he writes it? Meaning, play devil's advocate, like the get you could write. That's what you're asking. The get you could write. So why can't you write the Kedushin shtar?
Yeah, but here,
I'm asking,
even though they're Eidei Kiyum, the fact that there's Eidim.
Andy, we're not talking about the Eidim. We're talking about the document.
No, but the document maybe can be less intense. You don't have the Eidim in the Gittin situation. There's no Eidim sitting there. Here by Kedushin, we have Eidim anyway. So there's somebody that's.
Well, that's the question. Maybe you don't. Maybe.
Yeah, that's the question, right?
That's the question. Could you get away? Just like, remember, put it this way. The Rambam thought that Eidei Chasima worked for Eidei Kiyum. Could a Ksav Yad work for Eidei Kiyum? Because it embodies the will and the it's Hodas Baldin Kamedim Dami of the so this is a very interesting discussion. If you look at Rashi in the Gemara in Yevamos, you see everybody sees Talmud Babli Masechet Yevamos Lamed Amud Beis. So the Mishnah says there, "Kulan shahiyu ben kiddushin." I'm not going to go into the details of this, but kulan shahiyu ben kiddushin or gerushin b'safek karelu tzaros koltos v'misyavmos ketzad safek kiddushin zarek la kiddushin safek karav safek lok safek karav la zeu safek kiddush safek gerushin kasa b'ksav yad vein alavenim yesh alavenim vein bozman yesh bozman vein b'alei akad zeh safek gerushin. That's the same, similar to our Mishnah that we just read in Gittin and Pei Vav Amud Aleph. So Rashi commenting. Kasa b'ksav yado says the kaimelon hotziel of ksav yado shuchayiv govim menachasim b'nei chorim alma ksav yado below edim milsahi. So there's an added element. The Mishnah in Masechet Bava Basra, I have to pick up with this next week mostly, but on Daf Kuf Ayin Hey Amud Beis says that what about an alone? We've opened up, a whole new area of law here. In Get, everybody agrees that Kasa B'Ksav Yado works. This is just a debate why. But what about in Dini Mamanas? Let's say alone. Let's say I write out a document, a contract.
I could assume it could work also.
So it does work. That's what the Mishnah says in Basra. However, it doesn't work for Gevia Minachasim Mishubadim.
Meaning you can't take a lien off it? What does that mean?
Look on the next page. Correct. I mean, normally in Milva B'Shtar, you can be Govim Minachasim Mishubadim. If I lend you money and it's there's a contract, so the repayment includes liened property. But not with Kosab. Look, does everybody have it? Talmud Bavli Masachet Bal Basra Daf Kuf Ayin Hey Amud Beis. The Mishnah says, "Hotzi Olav Ksav Yado Shu Chayiv Lo." Let's say a person produces not a star with edim, but a star in the handwriting of the lova, of the borrower, that says, "I borrowed $100 from I Shimon borrowed $100 from Reuven." So the din is govim and chasim b'nei chorin. You can collect with that, but you can't collect liened property. You can only collect nechasim b'nei chorin. B'nei chorin literally means free property.
Because it doesn't have a call?
So it doesn't have a call. Let's assume for the moment because it doesn't have a call. Okay. So the Gemara has a discussion about it. The Gemara says, "Hotzi olav ksav yad shu chayev lo." If he produces this ksav yad, then the Gemara says, "Boy minei Rabba bar Nasan Rabbi Yochanan huchsa ksav yad bebezin mai." Let's say you go to court and you establish that with handwriting evidence that he's the guy who wrote the shtar. So not only do you have a ksav yad, you have one which has been verified to be authentic and accurate. What will happen then? Then will you be govim in the chasim mishubadim? Says the Gemara, Amarle, Afal Pishuch Ksav Yada Bebezdin, Eina Gova Elam in the chasim b'nei chorin. Nope, it's not good enough.
There's no call. There's no call.
Okay. Says the Gemara, Masiv Rami Bar Chama, Gimel Gittim Psulim. Then they quote the Mishnah and Gittin that we've been discussing, Pei Vav Amud Aleph. Because remember, this is rippling across the system now. We're trying to figure out the real, so the real Uber Ksav Yad is in a get. And we're trying to figure out what is its status in Dinei Mamonos, and we'll soon see, and in Kiddushin. So it's an interesting problem. Really, what we're testing is, there's a contract here, a contract there, and a contract there, meaning...
the only difference, as you mentioned, was that by the Gittin, there was no contesting. If there was no contesting by Shtar Lova...
There's no contesting here either.
Then there wouldn't be an issue. They would make it up, and they would pay each other, and that would be the end of it.
No, because sometimes a guy doesn't have assets, and it's a question of whether you can take the contract, and collect from mortgage property.
So the only issue right now that we're asking is whether you can collect from lien property.
Yeah, well, there's actually another issue.
Huh?
There's actually another issue, which I guess we'll pursue this next week, and that is when you typically have a shtar in Dinei Mamonos, we have a principle called shtar chabiyadi my boy, which means that, if I, this is what's following. Let's say I come to you and I say, you come to me and you say, you owe me $100. And I say, I paid you already. That's called kofar hakol. I'm denying that I owe you anything. And I'm patur, right? I don't have to take an oath. You have to, if you want to argue that I owe you money, you have to prove it. Motzi mechaver ala varaya, right? However, if there's a shtar, if I have a contract, so then the other guy, and I say, you owe me $100, and the guy says, I paid you yesterday.
So that's your receipt.
We say, shtar chabiyani my boy. We say, how come you don't have a receipt, or I still have the shtar? Is a ksavya, in a ksavya, do we say shtar chabiyani my boy? Or not? So actually, there's two issues in Dinei Mamonos. And the issue in Kiddushin is, let's say you have a ksavya in Kiddushin. Is that going to work in the absence of Eidei Kiyum as a shtar or not? So these three, the question of shibudim, the Gemara seems to resolve one way or another. It seems to say there's no shibudim. Why is there no shibudim? Let's just finish with that. So they're quoting the Mishnah, Masav Rabbi Chama, Gimel Gittim Psulim B'Mnisas Avlad Kosher, the Mishnah we just read. Elohein, Kosav Ksav Vein Olevenim, Yesh V'Edim Vein Bozman, Yesh Bozman Vein Bo Ela Ein Echad, Arela Gimel Gittim Psulim B'Mnisas Avlad Kosher. I'm reading it quickly because the same mission that we've been spending time on. Says the Gemara, Shiny Hasam de Bishas Ksiva Hu Deshibed Nafshe. Meaning a star Beta Masira is stronger, and therefore there's Gaviyam and Chasam Mishubadim than Eksav. So when it comes to Shibudim, it's clear that the Gemara in Bava Basra concludes that Eksav is not effective regarding Shibudim. But what's not clear is what about Shtar Chabyadi, my boy? That is a massive, massive argument between the Rishonim, the Rashbam and Tosos and Bal. Just so happens we're hitting all these big ones lately. But the Rashbam and Tosos and Balamor and Tosos Rid, they all say, why not? I mean, he has a piece of paper. Why wouldn't the other guy rip up the piece of paper? Would I leave you with the smoking gun? If I paid you back, would I insist either on a shovar, a receipt, or give me the contract and let's tear it up? What difference does it make whether it's a Ksav Yad or a Shtar? But the Rif, the Rambam, the Ramban, they all disagree. They say there's no Nechasim B'Shubadim and there's no Shtar Kabyani, my boy. Why? Now, with regard to Kiddushin, I'll just tell you, and then we'll pick up with this next week. The Bali Tosis and Yevamos assume that maybe Midrabanan you can't get away with a Ksav Yad for Kiddushin, but Minat Torah, surely you can. However, the Rajba in Yevamos, Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, and in Kiddushin Samach Amud Beis say absolutely not. Minat Torah, there's a difference between a get and Kiddushin, Shtar Kiddushin. Why? Because a get, number one, it says V'kasav v'nasan. Remember when Rashi was troubled, like what is the basis of the effectiveness of Ksav Yad? And the get, he said, because the Torah says V'kasav v'nasan. So if it's V'kasav v'nasan, does that apply? It doesn't say V'kasav v'nasan by Kiddushin. On the other hand, it does say Makish Havaya Liyitzia. We say V'yatza v'haisa. Usually, Shtare Kiddushin are learned from Gittin, but the words V'kasav v'nasan don't appear. So that's one issue. The other issue is that remarkably, the Rashba, because of this issue, questions whether you even need Eidei Kiyum for Gittin anyway. Maybe only Kiddushin needs Eidei Kiyum. So those are the things I want to investigate next week. And then I want to try to show you that the Rambam's position is very complicated. What he writes in Hilchos Ishus and what he writes in Hilchos Gerushin, when you read them together, leads us to understand that he distinguishes between them in an important way.
What's the logic? So the Kiyum only for Kiddushin, not for Gittin? So what you just said?
Yes. What's the logic of that?
Yeah, what's the logic for Kiddushin's more important than Gittin?
Because in Kiddushin, you're creating, one of the things we've been explaining all along is the reason that you need Eidei Kiyum, not just Eidei Birur in Kiddushin, is because it's more than the sum of its parts, because you're creating all these new relationships.
And when you're breaking relationships, you don't need it?
So the point is, when you're breaking the relationships, are you kind of just, you're destroying the building, or you're not, or are you building something in its place? Are you just dismantling?
Well, yeah, as long as you have to get out.
It may just be that the definition of
Meaning
Kiddushin.
the Chalos Ishus creates a new reality, which is why it affects the Krovim and why, there's Eishasish and all these things. In a get, there are two ways to look at it. One is, you have.
Well, you're freeing up all these people.
Right.
No, but
you're freeing up all the sisters and everybody.
If we believe
Right,
that,
but are you just going back
Andy,
to
one second. I'm sorry.
Right. Are you just undoing and going back to the original, the status quo ante, as opposed to Kiddushin? You're creating something new.
you're not just creating, as we saw, the Rambam and others say, you're trying to elevate something. So for that, you may need
In Kiddushin.
In Kiddushin,
Right.
in order to show the
Gittin,
status of Kiddushin being something elevated. Once the marriage disintegrates, while it's an important thing to document it and
so
everything.
one of the things I'm going to try to show next week, I'll give away all my secrets, is it's very interesting when the Rambam explains, the Rambam does think you need Eidei Kiyum for Gerushin, but he gives an explanation, a practical explanation he doesn't have parallel explanation in Kiddushin. Even though the Hilchos Kiddushin, Ishus, are before Hilchos Gerushin. So this is exactly what I'm going to try to show. What I'm going to try to show in the Rambam is that even though what I'm going to show is that the Rashba thinks that there's no Eidei Kiyum in Gerushin, which is remarkable, but that the Rambam thinks that there is Eidei Kiyum in Gerushin and in Kiddushin, but that they function differently. In the case of Kiddushin, it's about creating, this new reality. In the case of Gerushin, it's about the stakes being so high that we're not going to just rely on your admission, but it's not the creation of a new reality because it's the dismantling of the new reality.
So
that's
Zedek
what I'm trying to show next week.
Rabbanan by Gershon?
What?
Zedek Rabbanan by Gershon?
No, for the Rambam? No, I think it's Doraisa. The way he quotes is Doraisa. But I think that they just like we were talking about two perspectives on Eidei Kiyum, basically. Right? So what I'm going to try to suggest next week is that those two perspectives are both true according to Rambam. One is true for Kiddushin, and the other is true for Gerushin.
So one is traditional, and one is because to protect against problems that could occur.
So I'm going to try to show that we'll decide if it's convincing or not. But I'm going to try to show that in the Rambam. But first, we're going to discuss the Rashba a little bit and Shtar Chav my boy. So I want to finish with all of this hopefully next week. These are massive. These are the biggest contract issues in all of Jewish law. All these issues: Edei Chasima, Edei Mesira, Ksav Yado, Edei Machsum al Ashtar, the things that we've been discussing. They take a long time to go through, but they are like the foundations, of all Jewish contract law, which means Gittin, Kiddushin, Shtari Milva, loans, Shtari Mecher, Shichr Eved. These are like, this is like the core issues. Okay, so everybody have a great week. And hopefully
Thank you, Shkar.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Just your call.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay,
Right.
bye.